you, Brian. So today, I think most of you attended last time, so this is a pretty large crowd.
Yeah.
It's been a while since we had one, I guess, that's why.
Oh, I'm pleased with the attendance, yes.
So today's topic is on conflicts of interest, which kind of intuitively you know what that is all about. And there were three terms along with this in the title of the topics that were presented. We have to do personal, professional, and financial conflicts of interest. And financial is very easy to know it's different, but the personal and the professional, they kind of intermingle. So I tried to make it different, but I don't think that they're not going to be that different. So in some ways, you can think about, all of these topics that we study for the RCR. Most of them they're common sense. You know what you should and what you shouldn't do. And a lot of it is intuitive in terms of the decisions that you have to make, right? So why are we standing here? Why am I lecturing? And why are you all listening? What happens is that a lot of us forget, or it's not the most pressing thing in front of us as we are going through our daily research life and so on and so forth. So and also this refresher, it's sort of like a refresher training, brings out things that you may have forgotten, or there might have been some new piece of information that has come up that we need to cover. And most importantly, I think as researchers, when we get publicly PHS-funded grants, we are required to go through this RCR training. If you are researchers and your students applying for grants and you're applying for training grants, and sometimes the professors apply for training grants that then can give you the funding to study, they have to have a section on responsible conduct of research. How many times does the university teach it? When do you take it? How many times do you do the refresher? What are the topics you cover? This becomes, it's an element that is taken very seriously, and if the grant does not have that element in there written properly, it comes back and people have to write. So it's an important topic, and that's why we have to do this. So starting with what situations give rise to conflicts? Can you all think about it? I want to try to make this not too much of a discussion because we will run out of time, but kind of type in when I ask questions. So what kind of situations give rise to conflicts? We all understand what conflicts is, right? Conflicts is when you're put into the situation of having to decide what to choose. You have several options and you have to choose something. And how you make that selection of what to choose. You make it again. There's common sense. There's ethical principles. There's all sorts of different things that you have to evoke and make that decision. So it's really the conflict is what's staring at you, and you have to then make that decision on which way to go. So here are some of the situations that can arise. Multiple choices to make. You have multiple choices. There are so many different choices out there, and you have to select one. It could be courses. Which course should I take? Which one should I not take? Which advisor should I go for? Somebody says this one's nice and that one's not nice, but the one that's not nice has the research that you're interested in, so you have to make a choice. So these are all things that are going on in your mind. That's a different kind of conflict. Then there's multiple entities to please. You have to decide to go to a meeting or another meeting that you really are interested in, but your professor wants you to go to this particular one. You have totally no interest. You have to make that choice. So it's just something I'm throwing out, but you get the idea. When you're faced with conflicts, there are so many different choices to make, and you have to decide to make them based on your personal preferences, based on certain guidelines, based on policies. We all have to do that. Your moral principles are at stake too, right? You have to make your ethical decisions based on what you think is right. Do I work with animals? Do I kill this mouse, or do I not work with animals? Should I just choose an in vitro system to work in? So there are issues like that. Why is it important to recognize conflicts? Why do you think it's important to recognize conflicts? Then you know that there's a conflict here, or that there should be a conflict. So, if you won't tell me, I'll tell you. As scientists, so when I write that sentence, public confidence in researchers. So you have to recognize conflicts because the public has put their money into research. So you get it through various sources, but it's the public money that has gone in there. And they're really looking up to you to give them the results of that research that you would do. That would end up maybe as a therapeutic, maybe as some kind of a device, maybe as some kind of policy statement, something. But the public has put in so much trust into you that if you are biased in the way you do your research, then it's going to be a problem for the public. So there are lots of issues that come up as conflicts when you are living your daily life as a scientist or as a researcher. And we'll go through some of those. It's two right there. So then you come to compromise the quality of research. So if you have a conflict and you know you're being paid by a drug company and you're doing research on that, so that would compromise the quality of your research, right? You might want to continue that funding, or you know that you're going to get a big pot of money at the end of it all. So you might be biased and you might do things the way the company wants you to do it and present results the way. So there's that element that would also constitute a conflict. It will also affect the reporting of results the same way. So there are many other scenarios. Can you think of other scenarios where you would face these sorts of situations? So you will probably come across them. And what I would like for you to take away from today's lecture is keep all these points in front of you. Maybe keep the sheet in front of you and say, okay, am I facing this as you're going through your research life? That's the whole idea.
I was just going to say, like, a lot of the examples you see where there's issues, often on mine as a compliance officer, is when there's a financial conflict of interest. Many times it's an issue that it's because of that point you have there about public confidence in the researcher. So in the research, so the public perception is that the researcher has something financially to gain from the results of the research, then it compromises
their trust in you.
The integrity of the research. And those are the situations, at least with the Conflicts of Interest Committee, that we review and manage if we can manage it.
So then there's stress on the researchers also. There are other professionals in terms of the conflict would be, I need to do this and this and this to be promoted. I need to do this to be able to get funding. And I need to do this to be able to show to the university I am the best faculty around or something like that. So they are facing conflicts every time. As students, you face conflicts too. And this is what I would like you to think about. What are some of the conflicts that you face? Yours is going to be, of course, selection of mentors and so on, but there's also the other things, for example, and this actually goes from conflicts, ethics and conflicts now merge, right? You see somebody doing something wrong in the lab, and you know you should report it, but this person's your friend, would you report it or not? So it's a conflict, but it also comes under ethical ways of doing research. So these are kinds of things that you will go through that you should keep in mind, and then when you run into issues like that, you know who to go to. You go to Brian Weimer, the research compliance officer, and talk to him to see what you should do. Who faces those situations of conflict? I just said that. Pretty much everybody that's in the research business. We're talking responsible conduct in research. Pretty much everybody here. Students, faculty, postdocs, administrators, all the people that are involved in trying to do, or involved in the research atmosphere go through the same kind of different questions, but they'll go through a conflict issues. Scientists and researchers have a responsibility to the community, to each other, in ensuring outcomes of research, in ensuring that the outcomes of research are beneficial. That's what the public is looking for. We have a responsibility, and I think that one of the lectures is going to cover the scientific the responsible scientist lecture. I think there's one, right? So you'll go through more of those things, but we do have a responsibility. You as a scientist have a responsibility in making sure that you do your research with integrity, your results are reported in a way, you learn about how scientific research needs to be done and reported. So those are all the places where you have to do this, but you will face conflicts, again, based upon the kinds of environment you are in. Maybe somebody is cheating and you need to say something because you are a responsible scientist. Scientists are also charged with critically assessing existing knowledge and finding new knowledge. What does that mean? So as a scientist, when we think of doing research, we look for questions. We look for, what do I want to research in? What's going to be important? You're not just going to do any research that won't have a kind of significance for the public. It could be health related, it could be not really in health, but maybe in technology or something, but you are going to be involved in that kind of decision making. So if you then again face issues where your ability to do that critical assessment is compromised, because you want a quick result, you want a promotion, and you know you have to publish a paper, and you just fabricate something, put it in. You'll be learning about some of these in other modules, but this is another place where you find conflict. Conflict comes up everywhere. Okay? And create new products, devices, therapeutics. These are all, again, things that your scientists are going to be doing, but we just discussed this a little while ago, that if you're working for a pharmaceutical company and you have this pot of gold that you can get, then you may run into conflicts. So there are places where we would have to go through some of those policies that have been developed for financial, personal, and professional conflicts that we will come to. So you have to do all of these decision making, these conflicts that are constantly coming up. You have to make all of these decisions in the face of this kind of an environment. There's a reward system, like I said, promotions, money, grant funding, fame, all of those things, the financial and personal gains. You have to make these decisions in the face of all of these things. So the next few slides are taken from the Public Health Service PHS guidelines as to what constitutes conflict in research. And most of the institutions, most of the organizations refer to the government policies. And I've searched, and most of the time this is what you come up with. Everybody else has taken it from the PHS guidelines. There's a policy manual from which you get this information. So if you're interested in learning more on specific things, you can go and go into the website and look for particular conflict policy statements in them. So let me just go through and read it, and we'll dissect it in the next other slides that are coming up. So the definition of conflict of interest refers to a situation in which a public official or an entrusted caretaker, so these are key words, the public official or an entrusted caretaker, can potentially exploit the relationship for personal gains. Okay, so that's important, personal gain, either monetarily or in kind. So it doesn't always have to be money. It could be a promotion. It could be, sending me off to a vacation somewhere because that's what I want. And which behavior is contrary to the obligations and entrusted duty to act for the benefit of the public. So you get that, right? So you have to make sure that we understand what it is that constitutes conflict of interest before you can make a decision to go this way or that way or that way. So, and this is where you get into that situation of which decision is the best for me. There's something called apparent conflict. There's real conflict, and usually there's conflict related to gain of some sort that could bias decision-making process. So biases come in when you make those decisions. So a real conflict of interest is pretty direct. It's easy to recognize. Nobody can escape it. And so we try to avoid that in many situations. A real or actual conflict of interest arises when an employee is assigned official responsibilities in a particular matter that will directly and predictably affect the employee's personal financial interests, usually for the positive, or the interests of others, specific persons. And those other specific persons are all of the people that are called people with whom you have conflict are these. People with whom the real conflict exists is easy. The employee's spouse, the employee's minor children, because they're dependent on the employee. The employee's general partners in an outside business or endeavor. So these people are connected in some way, either in a business or in a scientific endeavor. An organization, the employee serves as officer, director, trustee, or a general partner or employee, and any organization or persons with whom the employee is negotiating for or has an agreement for job prospectus and so on. So these are all very easy. If you are talking to somebody about going and working there, and you are in a position where you have to make some decisions that's going to affect that particular company in getting a grant or some money or some kind of fame, then you are in conflict with the job that you've been entrusted to do. So you're not supposed to do this. One other thing that comes up, I don't know if it will, some of you can relate to it, working in the government, and you are asked to sponsor somebody for a green card or an H-1 visa or something like that. and you're not really directly the supervisor, but they just want a recommendation letter, you're in conflict because you are helping the government. So this goes to the Immigration and Naturalization Services, which is also part of the government. So you are in conflict. You cannot do that because maybe by bringing that person in, you will be helping the government in some way, and you're not allowed to do that because you have some knowledge about what the government does. So again, convoluted ways of thinking about it. That is why there's never going to be an answer that any one of us can give you. You go to the research compliance officer, and they know which way to go and get the right information and make it. Did I finish that? I did.
And just to add to that, as you alluded, the institution tracks the public health service guidelines and policies. So our conflicts of interest policies here at Tulane track what the PHS guidelines and regulations are. So, are any of you employees at Tulane or faculty at Tulane? So you filled out the annual conflicts of interest disclosure forms. So for those of you who aren't, anyone here at Tulane that is either faculty or staff, we have to fill out annual disclosure statements, and it will ask, are you conducting research? And then if you click yes, there's a series of questions that are asked. And asked is, part of what's asked is any sort of benefits that you are receiving from the sponsor of the research. So for example, one of the situations we'll see is if a pharmaceutical company is sponsoring the research, that they are also paying for the investigator to attend a conference and speak at a conference and giving the investigator, for example, $10,000 to do this. And under the regulations, that is a conflict of interest. It's over the de minimis amount that this PHS funded research. And so, we have to manage this conflicts because what we're looking at is anything that could either be perceived by the public to bias the outcome of the research, or that is a conflict, a direct conflict, in that you are exceeding the amounts that the government has said that you can take from outside entities for things like speaking and attending a conference, et cetera, when that's also a funder of your research.
It's going to come up. I have 3 slides on this. Okay, so then you have what's called apparent conflict of interest, which is not direct. You're not a spouse, you're not a dependent child, but you have relatives, you have friends, and so on. So, and you have your PhD mentors with whom you worked maybe many years ago, and you're still in touch with that mentor. So, things that you would do that might affect your decision-making process because these people are involved. So that's an apparent conflict of interest. So the appearance of a conflict of interest arises when an employee assigned to participate in an official duty matter where an organization with which the employee has a covered relationship or where the matter is likely to affect the interests of a household member. So you can read the rest of it. It's sort of just what I said. I made it very brief to say that if it involves a family member, a friend, or an organization with whom maybe your spouse is working in, and it's not the spouse now, it's the rest of the organization. So that constitutes an apparent conflict. So apparent conflicts are the ones that are most often missed because it's not very direct and you don't know whether you're in conflict or not. And some of those situations, I'll get to the examples, but one of the situations would be you're in an organization like the NIH who is funding research, and you're funding research for, let's say, Tulane Climate Center. But Climate Center comes under Tulane University, and you're in Tulane University. You don't know the people who have applied for that grant. You don't know anything, or maybe your spouse works there, but you don't know the rest of the people that are working there. If it's your spouse, you have to say no because you won't be reviewing those grants. But if it is somebody else in that institute, in that organization, and you don't know anything about them, you still will have to call it an apparent conflict and accuse yourself from doing any kind of reviews or making any kind of decisions on funds that can go there because it comes under Tulane University. If you favorably review that and the money goes to the Climate Center, the money comes to Tulane University. So Tulane University is also you. You're in the School of Medicine. You don't know those people, but it might benefit the School of Medicine. So that's an apparent conflict. Okay. So here are some more examples. People with whom apparent conflict exists are members of the households or relatives with whom they are deemed to have close personal relationships. So if it's a cousin and you're in close touch with some cousins you don't have any touch with, so maybe you can explain that away and say, I don't have a conflict because I don't know who this cousin is. I haven't seen them in so many years, but they may or may not buy it, but you have to declare that. Persons or organizations with whom they have or seek business, contractual, or other financial relationship other than routine consumer transaction. So it's not about going and buying something from a company, but if you have any interest in trying to get there and become an employee, or you're making your connections with other people there, then you have to declare that, because that's an appearance of a conflict. Persons or organizations for whom their spouses, parents, or dependable children are, to their knowledge, serving or seeking to serve as an officer, director, trustee, etc. So if any one of the people known to you are seeking any kind of an employment with this company on whom you have to make some decisions, for whom you have to make some decisions, that's an appearance of a conflict. It has nothing to do with you, but it has to do something with them. So that would be an appearance of conflict. So things like this, it should immediately strike a chord in you and to say, okay, I need to look into this. Okay, that's the whole purpose over here, because we don't know what situation any one of us is going to face till you face it. But you should have enough knowledge to say, I need to look into this. This looks like I would have a problem. If you don't, it'll be good. But you should always declare it, and then get it investigated. Persons or organizations for whom they have within the last year served as an officer, director, trustee, etc. So the other thing so this one says a year, but when we do peer review of grants, when we do peer review of manuscripts and so on, the journal, of course, will have their own guideline, but definitely when we do grants, it's a 3-year limit. If you have worked with somebody and it has been, you've published something in the last 3 years, and that can be, obviously, you can go into PubMed, you can find out how many people are published together and so on. And sometimes what happens is you are on a paper with someone, all you've done is provided some reagent, or it's the PI with whom you work, and the rest of them you have no knowledge about, but you still have your name linked to that particular person through that paper. And so you have to declare conflict. So you cannot review anything that is linked to a publication. So it's 3 years in some cases, 1 year like they say over here. So there's a time limit. If you have worked with, let's say, your mentor over here, and then you become a program officer, or you are on the funding end funding organization, you have the money to give away, and you find an application comes in that has your previous mentor's name on it, you've gone past the 3 years. So you really technically have no conflict, at least according to the PHS guidelines. But some people still continue a relationship. Some people have either they're working together with them, or they just have a personal relationship. At that point, it will be considered to be an appearance of conflict, and you should recognize that and immediately at least bring it up to whoever is soliciting you to review those sorts of applications. So you just don't know where it comes from. I used to have arguments with people. No, my mentor, this has been like 10 years since I did my PhD, 20 years since I did it, I have no relationship. No, but you worked with that person, and therefore you have a conflict. And so you get into this. What you do at that point, if you really want to serve on that review committee, then you just bring it up to the ethics officer or the scientific review person, and they can guide you exactly. So legally, I think you will be all right, but it's always best to bring it up and say this is an issue. And then the last one, an organization in which they are an active participant and serve as a committee chair, spokesperson, and so on. So while you may be president of your local PTA, you know what that is, right? Parent Teachers Association. You're all too young for and you help them, but then there's an education grant that goes out from that school. But you didn't do it. You're not writing it. You have nothing to do with it. But since you serve on it and your organization is trying to fund that, you have to declare conflict, that you have something to do with it. So again, it's coming out from somewhere that you would never even think you have to do that. And these things do happen. Okay. All right. Another example that comes up is, for like I said, Tulane University, School of Medicine, Private Center, Public Health, and so on. So if you get a grant or a manuscript to review, you have to first make sure that you let the people know that you are in the same university. If they say that's okay because we don't know them, we really need your expertise, they will work out a way to get you a waiver because nobody else has that expertise. You're the only one that has it, and so they'll find ways to do that. But you still will have to make sure that people know that you recognized it. Okay, here comes all the different ways, and this is where I would like you all to discuss a little and come up with some of your own examples. So what are some personal conflicts of interest that you go through in your day-to-day life? I give you some examples here for job security, promotion and job. So if you are in a department, I mean, this relates to faculty, but it could relate to anybody who's just working as a research assistant or so on and so forth. You might face these situations where your PI wants you to do something and you really don't think you want to do it because you have issues with it, but you don't want to bring them up because your job may be in jeopardy. You might not have a job next day, or you may not get promoted. So these are all personal things, right? It may not affect everybody, but it will affect you. And it also will affect you because you think of it a certain way. Maybe the next person around doesn't think of it a certain way. So this is a personal conflict. Special perks, such as going to meetings or conferences. If you please your boss, they may promise you, oh, I'll find some money for you. You can go to this meeting in Greece, right? So those are, again, conflicts. Is that really the way to do? I mean, should you have accepted that? Because you did something to please a person, and so you got this. And so that's a conflict of interest. Such things sometimes get done, and nobody knows. They may find other ways to do that, which would be an approved method to say, okay, well, I need this person to co-present if nobody else might let people. So there are ways you can get around some of these things, but the fact is that you are doing something to please somebody so that you can get certain special perks. So that's a conflict. Invitations to be presented, to be a presenter in a high-profile session. Again, if you keep your boss happy, you may be able to use their influences to go somewhere where normally you might not have been able to go. It may not be because of the research data that you want to present. It could be because of influence and so on. So that's, to some extent, these things, they will happen, and it will be okay to do that because it can be covered up in a certain manner of statement. And if it is beyond that, Brian will catch it obviously very quickly and say, no, that's not right. So be aware of things like this. You should, if you're going to a conference, you should go the way everybody else goes. Present that abstract, present that material that you want to be selected, and make sure it goes the right way. Okay, so that's a conflict. Research funding, publication of results, all of these things too fall under the same category. You want to make sure that you're doing it, you're getting your name on a paper for the right reasons, not because you are friends with whoever was the first author or the last author and so on. So scientists are expected to make decisions on conflicting situations that are unhampered by personal gain. So when you make a decision, when you choose, when you have a conflict, and when you choose which way to go, you want to make sure that that decision is unhampered by any kind of personal rewards that you get. Personal rewards could be money, it could be fame, it could be any one of those things that I lined up over there, and there are many more. So you want to make sure that you are a scientist, you're following the proper scientific methods, the proper scientific ethics. You're going to go through many more of those such lectures. And this is where the responsible conduct of research comes in. So you have to be very aware of the conflicts and how you make those decisions. In reality, the reward system presents with a number of opportunities to tempt the scientist away from executing the fairness, openness, and freedom in making such decisions. So what's the reward? What are some of those reward systems? For faculty, it would be promotions. It would be, for students, it would be, I'll go to a meeting, I can present, I can become famous. Everybody will be coming to me and asking me what is our publication. Many such reward systems. Money at the end of it, or if it was coupled to an invention, and so on. So you should be aware of some of these serious issues. Professional conflict of interest. You had a lecture on peer review last time, right? Last week. Did you go through conflict of interest there? Peer review of grants, peer review of manuscripts. Can someone, any one of you, raise your hands? You need to talk now. Where would you find conflict in these situations? What would you see as a conflict in these situations?
Same area of expertise.
Same area of expertise. You think it's a conflict?
It could be.
What?
Maybe if you are working on the same project, kind of thing.
What?
Competition kind of.
But that's competition. That's working. What would be the conflict over here?
Same institution.
Pardon?
Same institution.
Same what?
Institution.
Same institution would be a conflict, definitely, because if that gets published, the institution gets, so that would be a conflict. What else?
One of your friends?
If it is one of your friends, yes, that would be a conflict. But if it is one of your friends and it has nothing to do with the work that you're doing and you haven't published with them, you have that limit of 3 years or 1 year, it doesn't technically have to be a conflict. If you can then attest to saying, I can do this without any biases because I haven't worked with this person, I just know them. Actually, in truth, all scientists know each other. Okay? So it would be okay, but because you have a moral problem with this, ethical issues, you can say, I don't want to do it because this person's my friend. What else? Peer review. What else would come up?
One general question. So, where's the line drawn with regards to someone working in the same area? So, if my lab is trying to prove that oranges cure cancer, and someone's trying to prove that oranges cause cancer, like if someone's trying to show something that's directly opposed to what you're studying, doesn't that sort of create a conflict?
Yes, it does create a conflict for you. But if you don't know that person and you haven't worked with that person, it'll be fine if you wanted to review it. So there are guidelines when you review, and I'm sure that you went through it last time when you had that module. And then your answer about working in the same area. So why are you called to be a peer reviewer? A peer reviewer is somebody who is called upon because you have the expertise in that area, or something close, or you can make some good judgment because you are familiar with that. That's why you are even called to review. So it's okay if they're working in that area and you are asked to review their paper as long as you don't have any kind of a relationship. But and in your case, it's the opposite. They're working on something totally different, and what do you do with that situation? You can't just trash it because you want to prove the opposite. That won't work. That's not ethical, right?
Right, of course.
Comes in. Can you do it scientifically with, so when you do reviews, what do? You go look at the literature, you see what they've done. Is their methodology correct? There's so many things that go into making an unbiased decision on what you think about that research. So if you can get away from that personal, my research is better than theirs, or this is why it has to go, then you can go ahead and review. But that's going to be your ethical, moral values that will then be called into question, and you're facing that conflict. So if you can be honest about it and say, no, I can do this without getting my biases in, then that would be the way you should do. Because maybe nobody else is looking at oranges and cancer, and you're the only two groups looking at it. By not wanting to do that, maybe you're not, it's a disservice to
That's true, but wouldn't it also be possible, though, that there would be an apparent conflict if I might, decline a grant, but another expert in, a very closely related field might look at their grant, the evidence they present, and accept it?
Yeah. It would.
Is that still possible?
So those are all the decision-making thing that goes on when you have a committee that's going to decide. Question is, should you or should you not review that grant? That is your conflict. And if you feel very uncomfortable, then you should not review that grant, and that's what you let the person know. So there's two different things, right? It's a final decision based on the review committee, and they'll look at all this. And if they find that there'll be 3 or 4 reviewers, let's say, and 3 of them find it's okay, they've done scientific methodology is correct, and you're the only one that's saying no, and it's easy enough to see why you're saying no, because you're prejudiced. Okay. One other thing that might happen is that if you are the only 2 people working with oranges and cancer, and one is saying one thing, the other saying another thing, the applicant can always tell the review committee, send a note saying, this is the situation, I would like this grant not be reviewed by this other group because they are diametrically opposite to what we think, and we think it might be prejudiced. So
right. I wouldn't try to oppose the anti-orange people, but just based on my knowledge I have.
And that's fine, because it will be a scientific knowledge, and so you can say, I will do it, and I will have no biases, even though I'm doing something totally opposite. As long as you can, that ethics is in you to say, I can do this without any bias, you are totally free to go ahead and do this.
I
And then in your case, when you said that,
No, I actually meant like that.
yes, okay, so we're all on the same page. You have to have that conflict that comes up when you're reviewing it, is going to be something you have to decide and you have to declare. But you're not published with these people, nobody's going to say you're in conflict.
What if they're funded by the banana lobby?
Huh? I don't know. We'll let the SRO deal with that. Yeah, these are all things that will come up, and I think again you'll have to look at the grant and you have to decide at that moment what the other people are doing or what there's things to. Idea is you were alerted to this fact. Awards and awarding contracts. So what happens over here when you're awarding contract? What kind of conflicts would come up here? You will award it because this person's your friend, or there are things called sole source contracts, and there's an example right at the end that I put in there just to have some discussion at the end if we have time. But people decide this is the only company that can do this work, and we're not going to go and solicit anybody else. But it may not be so. It could be that the person who has the money, the program officer that has the money, wants to just give it to them because they have a relationship with them. That would be a conflict. So if you have any such tendencies, you should not be doing it. Committee membership, same thing. You to be a part of the committee, you have to be unbiased. You cannot have any kind of a relationship. So there are things called, every 3 months, let's say a committee gets together to review, like the human subjects group over here. It's a set of people, it's a group of people, it's the same people that get together over and over again to review all these applications. Now, let's say one of them had an application that ended up coming to that same committee. That person will obviously not be allowed to review anything else. First of all, it shouldn't even go to that same committee. It should be at some other ad hoc committee. But if it does go there, or if a person that applies for a grant to that committee is a friend of one of the committee members, that committee member is in conflict and should. So the committee has to be set up in such a way that nobody has any kind of a conflict. Or that grant should be taken out of this committee and go to a totally separate committee or be reviewed individually. So those are conflicts that will come up there. Serving on scientific advisory boards, same thing. Companies put together scientific advisory boards and they bring in all these top-notch people who they think are going to give them proper advice. But again, there will be a conflict if that person is working for the company in a way that favors everything that the company does because they're getting paid by the company. So scientific advisory boards can have conflicts there. So these are all professional conflicts. Teaching and training activities, same thing. You'll have conflicts if somebody's teaching or training, but they have, what was the thing I was going to say here? Getting those teaching and training grants based on something that they already know. They have friends in certain areas in certain countries, and so they can influence them to get them the grant if these other people are on the review committees and so on. So you could have conflicts anywhere else. Mentoring relationships are very, very important for you all, especially at this stage. A mentoring relationship, or what we call advisors and advisory relationships, you can see a lot of conflicts over there. And there used to be, I don't know if we have it this year, I didn't see it, but a mentoring, we had a mentoring lecture one time. But the mentoring relationship is where you have the advisor and the advisee, or the mentor and the mentee, and there are so many, many issues that come up. And I think if you go back to his website, you might find one of those lectures in there. So you have to be very careful in terms of how you deal with your mentor. Is that mentor providing the right kind of training for you? There are mentoring relationships where it is just confidentially discussing things, and is that mentor confidentially keeping, whatever you told to them, is not making use of this extra information you're giving to make their decisions with respect to that teaching and grading and so on and so forth. So mentoring relationships are something that I would advise you to keep special interest in, because this is where you run into a lot more conflicts. Then you have this the last one, the financial conflict of interest that Brian had just started saying. So this is the most critical for universities. This 2 or 3 years ago, they updated it, and so now there are changes in terms of how much money, how much stock, all those things that you can hold. And you may not face it at this point, but maybe very soon you will face these sorts of things. So let's just go through that. Financial conflict of interest is also called FCOI. Institutions have designated individuals or offices that is authorized to determine if a significant financial interest can affect the design, conduct, and reporting of funded research, especially if it is funded by the federal government. Okay, and we take that pretty seriously over here. SFI, that's a significant financial interest, is anything of more than of monetary value, including but not limited to all of these things that I've stated here: salary or payments for services, consulting fees or honorarium. So your salary that you're getting from the university is not included in that, but anything that you go out and consult, you get a salary, you get some kind of payment for services. Equity interest, and stock options, and so on in companies or in industry and things like that, that are also come under this significant financial interest. Intellectual property rights, patents, copyrights, royalties, because you know that they can generate funds. So that would be considered a financial conflict of interest, and you have to declare these things, and they have to be there's a certain cutoff value that you can have, and there's no conflict in financial payments which are as a result of your if you're doing this for a nonprofit or a public company or the government, you won't have to declare those things. There's also this thing on effort, okay, conflicts of effort. So what does that really involve? I know we can read through this. So quickly to summarize that. So you are students. You're working with a PI who is a funded research grant, and you are working on that particular grant. So the PI's interest is getting the grant work done. Your conflicts are what? Your home life, definitely, if you are married and with kids, but you also have classes to take. You also have exams. You have papers due, and so you may not be able to do exactly everything that the PI wants you to do. And if they force you to do that at the expense, you're first of all students, and you need to make sure that your grades are maintained and so on and so forth. So that becomes an effort issue. So these sorts of things come up again in that mentor-mentee relationship. We might want to sit and discuss about how much effort or how much time do they want you to be in the lab for, and how much work can you realistically do in the time that you can allot, because you have so much time for classes. You have to go and prepare for exams this much time you need. So you then sit down and figure out your effort levels. So that conflict needs to be straightened out by you. You're going to face that as a conflict, right? But other conflict of effort things are, for example, I can just rattle it out without going to the way it's set out here, but some of them would be for faculty especially, or for junior faculty, or postdocs trying to get somewhere. As scientists, you know that we serve the public, right? So peer review is another one of those things where you volunteer your time because you have the expertise. And it's a service that you do to for the scientific community. A lot of us are editors and journalists, right? Do you think we get paid? No, we don't. But I know I toil over them. I read and find the right reviewers, send them out. I get nothing for it, but it's a service that I pay back to the community, to the scientific community, to make sure that science goes on and we do it, with earnestness and so on. So when that happens, and also if it's a faculty trying to get to their promotion levels and so on, your service component becomes a big deal. People do look at that. Where do you volunteer? How many committees in the university do you serve? It's a departmental committees. How much do you do externally? How much peer review do you do? There's so many of these things that come in. They have to allocate the time. They cannot just, if they spend all their time doing that, what happens to the poor students who are reading for them to come and give a lecture or grade their exams properly or get the right knowledge so that they can do their classes properly? So that becomes a conflict of effort, right? So that is something that the institutions do look at. And a few years ago, if I remember right, NIH brought in this issue of how much time does each of your faculty spend doing peer review and all that, because they were getting funding to do the research, and they can track it, right? Because they're going back to the organization that's giving them the money, so they are in their database, so they know how many people are actually serving more than their amount of time that they should be. So that's conflict of effort. There's also conflict of effort when, let's say, faculty wants to do a startup company, so they're going to put a lot of effort into that. That startup company is going to give them money at the end. How much time should they take out of their primary jobs, which is to teach and so on, and be conscious of the fact that that's their major responsibility and others. So that poses conflict of interest. There's institutional conflict of interest, which comes up when institutions decide that that's not good. If the institutions are very interested these days in making sure that because funding is so problematic these days, hopefully things will improve, but they are really interested in seeing licensing out technology that is patented by the universities, and they would like to see this go to a license stage and then give it to somebody who can develop it so that the money can come back to the universities, right? But oftentimes they will do it for a certain purpose, but that may not be the investigator's initial purpose. So there's a conflict that they have to sit and resolve over that. So there are many such efforts conflict of effort that comes in. I mean, the last one may not be exactly conflict of effort, but when you spend a lot of time trying to research those things, you do end up getting into all the legal implications. You end up wasting a lot of time that you're supposed to do as a primary faculty. Startup companies, I just said that. Mentorship programs. People like mentoring. Okay, we like it even for faculty. We've developed mentorship programs, and people are asked to volunteer to be a mentor for a junior faculty, senior faculty for a junior faculty, and so on and so forth. How much time can you really spend on that? Because when you start talking, somebody comes and cries to you. It can go on and on and on. How much time do you want to do? That's conflict of effort. If federal funds support salary and more concerted effort needs to be spent to delineate efforts on these. The funded research, so your main responsibility goes to the funded research. Universities are tasked with monitoring. I already said that federal, if they give you funds, the funding agencies require some kind of a report as to how much time is being spent and so on. So, I think I've done it. Oh, this is my last slide, other than that example slide which you can read on your own. Confidentiality, I didn't see a module coming up on that, but it doesn't have to be a separate module. But confidentiality is kind of related to conflict in a way, because, like for example, the mentoring situation, which is the one that would affect you the most. When somebody talks to you and they are supposed to maintain that confidentiality. It's the same thing with peer review, same thing with peer review grants or manuscript. You are not supposed to leak out what you did, whose paper you reviewed, whose grant you reviewed, and so on. Or the mentor is not supposed to go out and tell everybody else, because that would maybe unduly affect or negatively affect something that you've told to them, and maybe the rest of the faculty hears it and say, oh, we're not going to take that PhD students because they have all these issues. That is breach of confidentiality. The confidentiality goes with the conflict in a way, because the person who is going to breach that confidentiality is in that conflicting situation. That was conflict. Or you want to be part of a committee, and let's say it's the senior faculty member or dean's office person who is sitting in on a committee when they should not be in that committee because it's a faculty-driven committee or it's a student-driven committee, and the final decision rests with the top people, right? If they are sitting through and listening to everything, then that poses a conflict of interest. So similarly, when you do these sorts of things, you should think confidentiality and conflict of interest are going to go together. These last three things here is when you're talking to companies, you actually talk to them and you get what's called a confidentiality agreement signed between the two of you to say, I'm telling you all my secrets, you're telling me all your secret, we are not going to talk about this outside as long as we are going to try to develop something, and if we didn't, then you shred the papers, you don't talk about it. And this kind of gives some elements of the different kinds of things you need to do. So you'll be doing more human subjects research. There's a lot of confidentiality, conflict of interest things that will come up there, so be aware. Take this lecture, remember it when you're talking about all of those other things. Peer review, you've already done. Partnerships with public or private organizations, businesses, you will do that as part of another lecture that talks about ethics and of being scientists and so on. So confidentiality sort of goes with conflicts. There are lots of gray areas, but they all sort of merge into each other, and your responsibility over here is to know that these things will exist. Know that you should bring them up in your own minds and make sure you get the right answers, and be responsible scientists. Okay, I think we've run out of time when we need to go through an example, but it's such a simple example, you should go through it and go through the CITI training for more examples. Any questions? We should stop, right? It's 3:30, it's 4:30 now.
Yeah, and I guess one point too is when there's a disclosure process, like either if you're asked to do peer review, of any potential conflict, or like at Tulane, we have the annual financial conflicts of interest disclosure forms that we all have to fill out. Utilize that process as Dr. Bansal pointed out, you have to think about these things, and it's not always clear cut. That disclosure process is a good time to put anything that you think might be a potential conflict out there, and then there's a review committee, for that, and they can evaluate it and either decide it's not a conflict or it's a conflict that can be managed, or that it is a conflict, and either you can't perform the peer review, or maybe can't accept that invitation to speak at the conference, et cetera. So utilize those disclosure processes, because that's when you'll have someone else taking a look at it, and you avoid being called out on that after the fact.
Yeah. And the other thing that happens is if you're all part of your PI's grants, you all have to do that conflict of interest. Even as students, I think they have that. And it is done like a grant before the grant gets submitted. They're not looking at anything. If the grant doesn't have all the key personnel, if you're a key personnel, meaning you have some substantial involvement in the process, you will have to do that. And it is done before. So it's good to do it well ahead of time, get all these questions answered and keep it ready so that the grant doesn't face any kind of delays. And that affects the PI, and if it affects the PI and his grant, it affects you because you won't get your stipend money. And so it's all sort of related. Any questions? No? Well done.
Thank you, everyone.